ArcfieldWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Tuesday, December the 31st, the last day of the year 2024. It will go out as a wet one in the mid-Atlantic region, the northeast U.S., and a pattern change to much colder conditions for the central and eastern states will really begin later this week and then accelerate this weekend with progressively colder conditions this weekend in the eastern part of the nation. We'll have a couple of storm threats next week, it looks like. I think there'll be a storm threat for the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast U.S. early next week, maybe Monday night time frame, and then another threat late next week. In between, some Arctic air, some brutal cold air can make its way all the way down into the deep south. In yesterday's video discussion, we kind of detailed all of the teleconnection trends that favor the transport of very cold air from northern Canada into the central and eastern states. You can certainly review that video for the details on those teleconnection indices, such as the AO, NAO, PNA. We won't discuss those in detail today, rather just going through the maps here. I think it's pretty much baked in the cards that we have this very cold weather pattern setting up now for the central and eastern states, and it will be an active pattern as well. Let's start off with the 0Z run of the ensemble version of the GFS. What we're looking at are the 2-meter temperature anomalies averaged over 5-day periods, rolling 5-day periods. This is the current 5-day period, and then we'll go from days 1 to 5 to 2 to 6, 3 to 7, etc., into about the middle part of the month of January. First of all, starting off here with some warmer than normal conditions to end the year 2024, but a cold frontal passage on Wednesday will start to usher in at least moderately cold air for the northeastern states for Thursday and Friday. Then it becomes progressively colder this weekend. So let's walk through this and notice this area below normal, 2-meter temperature anomalies right here over the southwestern part of Canada into the northern plains, and it just gradually moves to the south and east here over the next several days. Now we're out to days 6 to 10. This encompasses that time period, January 5th to January 10th. We'll go out a little farther in time. And again, these are 2-meter temperature anomalies here, now days 9 to 13, which is January 8th to January 13th. And next week is a particularly interesting look to it with, again, a couple of storm threats, some extreme cold air mixed into the picture as well. And we'll go out as far as this particular model run goes, all the way out to days 12 to 16 here. That is January 11th to January 16th. Now we're all the way out to the middle part of January. As we mentioned in yesterday's video discussion and in the recent postings at ArcfieldWeather.com, this cold wave will have some staying power. There is a stratospheric warming event that is ongoing that will help to sustain this cold weather pattern later in the month of January, perhaps all the way into the month of February as well. There's oftentimes kind of a lag with the stratospheric warming event. In this particular case, and we detailed this yesterday, the polar vortex, the stratospheric polar vortex, will move onto the North America side of the pole and really get centered over the southern part of Canada, the northern U.S. That kind of acts as a source of cold air, and will again help to extend this cold wave well into the month of January, perhaps as long as February as well. Another thing I want to point out with this particular time frame here, notice the differences with normal here. They kind of the core of the cold air relative to normal really moves down into the Tennessee Valley region, places like western North Carolina, where hopefully anybody left in those tents after the hurricanes have to move to permanent shelter. This is some serious, some dangerous cold coming over the next couple of weeks. And again, the core of the cold air will be centered over the Tennessee Valley in terms of relative to normal, some 15, 20 degrees below normal by the time we get to the second week of January and even into the third week of January. But this is a very impressive look to an ensemble run. Again, ensemble runs, we've mentioned this in prior videos, tend to smooth things out as you go out in time. They tend to increase the weighting of climatology, which again tends to smooth things out. So the cold extremes become less extreme as you go out in time. So seeing temperature departures from normal this low by the time we get to the end of this model run all the way to the middle of January, very impressive indeed. And notice again, we've talked about this, this particular cold wave is going to extend all the way down into the southern states where there is even a chance of snow. Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Georgia, even parts of Florida can experience this cold wave and even some snow all the way down into those southern states. We'll take a look at a snowfall map in a moment here, but this is very impressive cold shot here. Cold wave, a stretch of cold weather, again, really gets underway later this week and starts to accelerate this weekend. Next week, some extremely cold air gets mixed into the picture. Now let's take a look at the 500 millibar height anomalies from the ensemble run version again of the GFS, the 0Z GFS. We already have some troughiness setting up here over the eastern part of the nation and also some high latitude blocking setting up across Greenland and the northeastern part of Canada. Now we'll go through again, these are rolling 5-day averages from the current 5-day period all the way out into the middle part of the month. We'll kind of quickly go through these. Here we go into days 5 to 9. This is January 4th to the 9th. And notice that trough extends to the west. We've talked about this really over the past couple of weeks, how a trough initially over the Atlantic Ocean tends to what we call retrograde or move westward. And indeed, this is building back to the west. At the same time, you continue to have this high latitude blocking over Canada. The higher heights than normal, higher pressures than normal are shown on these particular maps in orange and red. Deep upper level trough indicated here by the blues. Go out days 7 to 11, and let's go even farther out, days 9 to 13, 10 to 14, and we'll go all the way out here to the end of this particular model run, days 12 to 16. This is January 11th to January 16th. Still significant trough situated over the eastern part of the nation, the central part of the nation, and then the Atlantic Ocean. And we have this blocking pattern over Canada. And notice also a ridge of high pressure here along the west coast of the U.S. and the west coast of Canada. And this particular kind of a pattern absolutely favors the transport of cold air masses from northern Canada, maybe even the other side of the pole, from the Siberian side of the pole into the North American continent. And this is all the way into the middle part of the month of January. So if you have low pressure centered in the upper part of the atmosphere over the east coast, and you have this upper level ridging all across Canada and the west coast. And by the way, to bring it back to the teleconnection indices, this is your negative NAO type of pattern. When we see the upper level region over here, negative AO again over the polar region here, and this is what we call the plus PNA. And again, refer to Monday's video discussion for a lot of detail on all these teleconnection indices. But this is how those teleconnection indices translate to the 500 millibar pattern here. Again, a very cold, a very active pattern for the central and eastern U.S. with high latitude blocking. That also helps to sustain a kind of a cold stretch of weather here when you have high latitude blocking up to the north over Canada. And again, we talked in yesterday's video discussion about an ongoing stratospheric warming event. That too will help to sustain this pattern well into the month of January, perhaps as long as February. Now here's a forecast map from the 0Z run of the GFS. This is the conventional version of the GFS, not the ensemble version, but the operational version or conventional version. 10-day forecast going all the way out to the end of next week, Friday, January 10th. And again, next week looks particularly wintry, particularly interesting with a couple of storm threats early next week, late next week for the central and eastern U.S. Some extreme cold will mix into the picture here. And look at this snowfall forecast. This is totally believable, in my opinion, that the deep south experienced some snow in this kind of a pattern here, all the way down into southern Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, even into the panhandle region of Florida. This is not a crazy forecast map. This is something that is believable in this kind of a pattern. You will have that cold air penetrating deep to the south. And again, if you are in a tent in western North Carolina, try to find some permanent shelter. This will be some serious, some dangerous cold over the next couple of weeks. Notice some significant snowfall here as far south as Arkansas and Missouri as well in this particular model run. And this is not set in stone here by any means here, but I just wanted to mainly point out this threat of accumulating snow all the way down into the deep south. That absolutely can happen in this kind of a pattern. Now, before we get to kind of focus in on the computer forecast maps from the conventional GFS for the continental U.S., I just want to point out one thing here that could potentially play an important role during wintertime model forecasts. This is a model forecast of snowfall from the 0Z run of the GFS going all the way out to the end of the GFS model time sequence, which goes at 16 days, 384-hour forecast map. Just wanted to point out the difference between a 0Z run and, in this particular case, a 6Z run. I often favor the 0Z runs or the 12Z runs as opposed to the 6Z runs and the 18Z runs. This is kind of inside baseball, but I wanted to point this out here because radiation observations, believe it or not, are still used to supplement satellite imagery data into the computer forecast model. So radiation observations are still very important for computer forecast models, and they are typically launched around that 12Z and 0Z time frame. So when you look at a 6Z model run or an 18Z model run, they're actually operating with stale radiation data, maybe 6-hour-old radiation data, and that can introduce some small errors. Small errors in the beginning of a model run, not a big problem, but if you go out 15, 16 days, those small errors in what we call numerical weather prediction really magnify and can cause big differences between a 6Z run and a 0Z run. Look at this snowfall forecast in the basically the I-95 corridor region of the Mid-Atlantic region from the 0Z run. Now take a look at 6-hour later forecast from the 6Z run. Big differences. Now, I'm not saying this is necessarily wrong here, but I would not have confidence in this kind of a forecast between the 0Z run here for snowfall totals and the 6Z run here until they become confirmed by the 12Z model run, which comes out early this morning here. So again, watch out for that. If you're one of those that likes to look at long-range snowfall total maps from these computer forecast models, you will often see, if you focus in on a particular location, a big difference between a 0Z run and a 6Z run, or a 12Z run and an 18Z run. Just be careful and make sure that trend continues for the next model run. Again, favor in importance those 12Z and 0Z model runs. And it's all because of radiation observations, and the upper atmosphere is critical to the accuracy of these computer forecast models. Now, let's kind of walk through the surface forecast maps, and I am using the 0Z run of the GFS right here, the conventional version of the GFS model. Let me just get rid of this, change this cursor here, and now we have a normal cursor. We have a kind of vigorous storm system to end the year, end the month of December here. 994 millibar low here on Tuesday morning over the Midwest. Mostly a rain event here, a little bit of snow depicted here in blue here, and this moves rather quickly into the Mid-Atlantic region. Some rain, places like DC, Philadelphia by late afternoon, maybe even a late day thunderstorm. That rain continues all along the I-95 corridor region, D.C., Philadelphia, New York City, into the evening hours. It could even be a few downpours mixed in. And again, isolated thunderstorms, also a possibility in the Mid-Atlantic region as this system moves through late this afternoon, this evening, into the midnight hour. So it could have an impact on fireworks at the midnight hour throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, northeast U.S. That moves on past into, causes some snow upstate Maine on Wednesday, New Year's Day. And then notice here on the backside, a very tight pressure gradient. We will have winds on Wednesday, New Year's Day, up to 40 miles per hour or so out of the northwest in the Mid-Atlantic region, places like D.C., Philadelphia, New York City. Any kind of a parade on Wednesday certainly will be impacted in the Mid-Atlantic region by these strong wind gusts up to 40 miles per hour or so. Now, moderately cold air moves in for Thursday. And I want to point out here, we've talked about these dashed blue lines before. Notice, for example, by Thursday morning, it's a 522, what we call thickness. That represents a thickness level between the surface and the 500 millibar, the middle part of the atmosphere. The lower those thickness levels, the lower the average temperature in that particular layer. And I just wanted to point out, notice here by Thursday morning, 522 thickness, and then we'll move into the latter part of the week and into the weekend. Here's Friday, and now here we are into Saturday morning time frame. Notice that 522 thickness pushed all the way down into North Carolina. We have 516 thickness way down here. That is suggesting we are getting progressively colder in the Mid-Atlantic region, the northeast U.S. over the latter part of the week going into the weekend. So that cold air is already starting that push way down into the deep south. You see this 540 line all the way down, cutting across Georgia and Alabama. So we get progressively colder in the atmosphere as low pressure moves out over the western Atlantic by the early part of the weekend and intensifies, pulls in with strong northwesterly winds here. Then we start to, attention turns to the development of a storm system right here over the middle part of the nation by the end of the upcoming weekend. And again, by this time there's a lot of cold air situated over the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast U.S., Northern Plains, even down here into the central part of the nation, cold enough for snow. And this is the potential of significant snow, places like Arkansas and Missouri here, the latter part of the upcoming weekend into the early part of next week. Now, this is the GFS model run forecast for Monday morning, and it tends to weaken this system as it pushes to the north and east. I don't think I agree with that right now. We'll have to certainly monitor this closely. I think this is maybe underdoing the strength of this low. We're talking early next week, Monday time frame, still several days away. This particular model run may very well be underdoing this, but I talked about a couple different storm threats here next week, and this is the first one, the initial one, into the Mid-Atlantic region, into the Northeast U.S., at least potentially. Also, the Midwest gets hit by this as well. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday time frame. Then we go out a little bit farther in time, and by late next week, you'll start to see some very, very cold air dropping into the central and eastern U.S. We talked about those thickness values here. Look at this, a 498 thickness value here. One of the rules of thumb that I've kind of learned over the years with respect to these thickness values, look at that last couple of digits here, 510 or 516, and this is roughly equivalent to maybe 10-degree type air or 16-degree type air. You drop that 5 here, 22, maybe close to 522 thickness, maybe close to, kind of think of it as 22-degree air. When you get to 498, you're talking about a couple degrees below zero here. This is below zero type of air when you're dealing with 498 thickness in the month of January. And of course, that partially depends on how much snow cover there is. Extensive snow cover will make it even colder than the thickness value may suggest. So this is kind of a rule of thumb. We've talked about the 540 thickness being kind of a rain snow line. It's kind of equivalent to 40 degrees, maybe 35, 40 degrees. So that's why we kind of typically look at that first for rain snow delineation. And notice here in this case, it's all the way down to the south. And here we have snow showing up in Texas here. This is now Wednesday evening, January 8th, all the way out to the middle part of next week, but extremely cold air here dropping into the central part of the nation by the middle part of next week. And this is that second storm system that is going to be a threat later next week, and it certainly will be driving to the north and east into some very cold air, potential for snow way down in the deep south. Now, this GFS model run kind of keeps this storm system suppressed to the south. That is on the table here. When you get an Arctic blast of this kind of magnitude, and you can see that influx of Arctic air here, right here, pouring down into the Tennessee Valley, into the deep south, you can suppress this system all the way down in this deep south so that it moves off in this direction. But it's way too early to determine that. There's a decent chance that it rides up to the north and east, closer to the east coast, and it's something we'll monitor next week. Again, this is that second storm threat for later next week. I think the general pattern is storm system affects the Midwest, Mid-Atlantic, Northeast U.S. early next week, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday time frame. Arctic air, maybe extremely cold Arctic air, moves in behind it latter part of next week, and then we have to deal with potential second storm at the end of next week. This takes us all the way out to the end of next week, Friday, January 10th, and this will be a very, very cold day, I can assure you, throughout the eastern half of the nation, all the way down to Texas, all the way down to Florida. Well, one last map I wanted to show in this very long video discussion right now is across the pond in Europe. Looks like very cold weather setting up for Europe as well. That is not surprising at all. Generally, in the wintertime, Europe and the U.S., especially the eastern U.S., can be kind of correlated. When they turn cold, we'll turn cold. When they turn snowy, we may turn snowy in the eastern part of the U.S. And part of that is because of a stratospheric warming event over the polar region that sets in motion the transport of very cold air from the high latitudes to the middle latitudes. Middle latitudes in this case being Europe or the central and eastern U.S. This is the snowfall forecast map for the next 10 days across Europe, and some excessive amounts here. So I just wanted to point out that Europe too will be experiencing a cold wave coming up for that first half of January, maybe even beyond, and some significant snowfall throughout the European continent as well over the next couple of weeks. So very exciting, a very wintry weather pattern setting up for the central and eastern states. It looks like it'll continue for the first half of January, probably well beyond that into the second half of January, potentially even into February. That's it for now. Stay tuned to arcfieldweather.com throughout the week for updates on meteorologist Paul Dorian.